Supreme Court backed employers in a suit over like strike losses. And so basically, I know this is kind of important to you, Marcel, is federal law did not protect a union from potential liabilities for damage that arose during a strike, and that a state court should resolve questions of liability. And I think that's, in some ways it kind of makes sense, in other ways it doesn't. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so to give a better picture of what happened, basically before a bunch of concrete plant workers went on strike, they started the truck, started mixing cement, and then said, all right, cool, we're going on strike, and left the truck running. And the company claimed that because there is, I guess, an expiration date on what cement, or expiration time on what cement, you can't just leave it mixing and mixing and mixing and it still be usable. They suffered financial losses as a result of this, and they sued the union. Supreme Court sided with business, because they always do. And I while I understand it, and I don't necessarily disagree with the logic behind it, fuck them. That's kind of how I feel about it. You know, it doesn't, like, no matter what, like, workers in business are always going to be on polar opposite sides when it comes to goals. You know, workers want to get paid more, businesses want to pay less. Workers would like better safety protections, so that way they don't lose an arm. Business says, well, how can I cut a corner? Maybe I don't need to put that railing in front of that giant boiling furnace of molten metal to try to keep people from falling into it. So, you know, what benefits the workers is almost always in opposition to what might benefit the business. And you know, when it comes to that kind of stuff, you know, we saw Gorsuch a few years, not this has been a minute, but when he ruled against the fire worker who left his stalled vehicle snow that was that's in order to preserve his own life, you know. So we never see them ever actually, when it comes to these kind of, side on the case of the worker, but all suddenly now it's side on the business. No, fuck the business. They'll screw over the workers every day, anytime. I don't give a shit about them. And you know, I'm always pro worker, doesn't matter what it is.
I think the other thing to think about is, like, in a situation where like employees want to go on strike, but now they're going to be potentially held liable for the impacts of that strike. Like, I think it shifts the power of balance into the employer's favor instead, because now employees are less likely to go on strike or demand more pay or like something else, because they're going to be terrified that they're going to be held liable for something. When
I think that's,
yeah.
No, sorry, finish what you're saying. I was just gonna
say, like, I think that I honestly forgot my train of thought. Never mind. Go ahead.
You're fine. But yeah, like, I think that is part of it as well. I mean, well, let's just say that is part of the fear too, is that maybe that, like, what counts as, like, where does this line get drawn, you know? Like, if I work at a grocery store and I go on strike and, you know, there's not enough workers to sell, I don't know, fucking oranges, and the oranges spoil, is the union responsible for the spoilage of those oranges? You know, so it is like, all right, where does this line get drawn when it comes to, like, how does a strike impact the profits of a business? Now, if it's a case of where workers can't set things up in a way before they go on strike to add to the increased cost of striking to the business, I get it. But if it's just any sort of situation in which a strike that cost the employer money, opens up the workers to a loss, then yeah, that's just another in a long list of government siding for business at the expense of labor. And yeah, it potentially opens up, you know, unions to be liable for all sorts of bullshit that they shouldn't have to be liable for, because it's a right for it's an inherent human right uh, to demand fair compensation for your labor, and you shouldn't have to suffer because of that.
I mean, I think it's also anti-union too, because if it's not the workers that are going to be held liable, then it's going to be the union, and so workers are going to be less likely to unionize because the benefits of unionization will be lower, quite literally. Like, and
Well,
so it further shifts that balance. I guess that's all I'm trying to say.
no, yeah, I agree, and like, well, that too, and it's like all of a sudden, it's it's like a cascading effect that could really hamper a union, because especially if it's a smaller union, doesn't have a lot of members, it might not have that much money on hand. It's not like every union's just this giant cash funnel, um, and so all of a sudden, you might get away with charging your workers $15 a paycheck for their dues. But if you're liable for product spoilage or whatever, union dues have to go up to compensate for that, and now the union seems like a less attractive an option to the workers, and that can really hamper union membership, especially in certain states where they're already doing putting in a lot of requirements to try to do that. I know that there's a certain percentage of workers that have to vote in order to unionize, and so it wouldn't increased dues could really hamper having that percentage.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of shows the level of corruption that the highest court in the land actually has, and it's kind of scary, because if the highest court in the land has this level of corruption, then what? Like, just imagine how bad it is at like a lower level. And
Oh yeah. No, I mean, there's very few things as American as corrupt government officials. And people believe that the corruption is usually anti-business, when it's the exact opposite. It's in favor of money and interest 99% of the time.
yeah,
Uh,
on a more
yeah.
positive note, something the Supreme Court did do correctly, not, I know I was just shitting on them, but they also can do things right, is they basically struck down a Republican drawn gerrymandered the fuck map or district in Alabama. And like the map essentially discriminated against African American voters, and wouldn't it combine the two biggest cities like that Alabama has into one?
Yeah, so I mean, this has been a map for Alabama. Like, this isn't, so it's a little bit more complicated than that. So basically, Alabama has what, seven congressional districts, and a lower court said they needed to make a second. Two federal courts, but lower than the Supreme Court said that Alabama need to add a second majority black district, because as it's currently drawn, they have one majority black district that includes Birmingham and Montgomery, and then the other 7 districts are all Republican run white majority districts. So all they really would have to do is basically give Birmingham and Montgomery their own district. And so Supreme Court decided to take up the case, because Alabama, being Alabama, said, well, how dare y'all come after our racist as fuck gerrymandered maps? And rare win by the Supreme Court. I don't know how cynical this win is, but I'll take it. Basically rule that, yeah, Alabama, you need to listen to the lower court and draw another district. So might be gaining an extra Democratic representative out of Alabama, which I'll take. I mean, I'll take, and I'll also take the precedent this hopefully sets as far as how states can draw their districts, because there's a lot of states like Alabama is certainly not the only state like this. Florida recently, you know, basically drew their districts to where like Tallahassee, which is a majority Democratic area, no longer has a Democratic representative because of the way that the maps were redrawn. Actually, this happened all up and down Florida, but this happens everywhere. There's a very famous district. I don't remember what state it's in, but it's basically just a giant thin line going across the state. Uh, Increase voting power of the majority party in that state. And I mean, everyone knows how fucked up gerrymandering is, and honestly shouldn't exist. These congressional districts probably should be drawn by some non-partisan committee. If AI could be trusted to draw districts, that might be a possible option in the future. But certainly, hopefully this will set a precedent for future Supreme Court rulings, because this will be the last ruling when it comes to fucked up districts, hitting the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows you just like, I guess it's just classic tactics by Republicans of like, well, we're going to say they're going to be told to do one thing and they're going to just not comply and expect not to get caught. And then they're going to be upset when they do get caught, like when they tried to overthrow the government back in 2020 and just like, or Donald Trump and his indictment. And so just kind of stuff like that. I think it's just like another version of that happening at a state level. Thankfully it was caught this time, and they're going to have to fix their mistake.
Yeah. And it's that I will say, I'm one of those anti it's both sides kind of people. Like, it's rarely both sides, but when it comes to gerrymandering, it is very much a both sides issue, because New York is gerrymandered all the hell as well in favor of Democrats. Like, we really just need to get rid of, like, politicians should not be able to choose your voters. Like, the whole purpose of democracy.
It rigs it. It literally, they can basically rig it to whichever way they want it to go, whether that's the blue side or the red side. And I think it should just be based off what the people want, whether that's blue or red. Okay, that's what the people wanted,
Yeah, and like, districts should be drawn as close to being a perfect square as possible, and it should never like cut communities in half. Ideally, it shouldn't ever cut counties in half, but it certainly shouldn't ever cut entire cities in half either. Like, I shouldn't have to have a different congressional representative than my neighbor who lives down the street. But, I don't see gerrymandering being outlawed anytime soon. Fingers crossed that it does happen, because I don't think that we can ever call ourselves a true democracy when our politicians are the ones that decide whether or not they have a seat and not the actual voters.
Yeah, no, absolutely.